one of the things that I think is going to happen for the brokers who really embrace AI is that they're going to start looking at not just how do you improve, we already do A to B, how do you improve that? It's more, does A to B even make sense anymore?
Welcome to the Leader's Edge podcast. I'm Zach Ewell, market analyst and podcast producer here at Leader's Edge. In this podcast, sponsored by BrokerTech Ventures, I talk with John Jackovin, executive director of the BrokerTech Ventures Accelerator. In this conversation, Jackovin shares key insights and takeaways from his view of companies maturing in their use of artificial intelligence. We then go on to discuss the latest trends and themes impacting the innovation environment, and by extension, the greater BTV ecosystem. Give it a listen. John, thank you so much for joining.
Thanks for having me.
Tell us about this year's Accelerator cohort. Are you seeing any particular trends among the startups? Last year there was a lot of AI. Is that still the case?
Yeah, so we definitely are still seeing AI. It seems to be maybe moving downstream a little bit when it comes to processes and who's using it and I think of like early AI was really focused on like kind of high level processes that happened, and now people are looking at how do we bring it down to the desk, because even if two people have the same job and do the same thing presumptively, they may do it differently. And so the ability for them to work the way that they want to work, but then leverage AI, we're seeing a little bit more of that. And maybe that's just because eventually it's gotta trickle down. But that's an interesting one. AI is still pretty dominant in what we're seeing, and quite honestly, I think we're going to see that at least for the foreseeable future. The one thing that we are noticing is that companies are indicating that AI is something that they leverage inside of their applications, as opposed to them, claiming to be an AI company. Whereas a lot of early startups in the AI space were like, "Oh, we're such and such AI," and they're certainly leveraging AI, but there's only a handful of companies that are truly like building these LLMs and improving on them and have the capacity to constantly improve how they process what they do, the accuracy in which they do that. And most of us just leverage those. So it's just leveraging the AI technology that's been developed, and we may do some things with like training our own LLMs, but it's the underpinnings of bigger ones, which is nice because now we're seeing companies really focus again on what problem they're solving as opposed to just AI. And now we're getting kind of past that point where AI adoption has been problematic or seen as a kind of an unknown.
Oh, that's very
Um,
interesting.
yeah, so now people are way more okay with introducing it into their workspace. And but we're also seeing what's kind of nice too is that it's not all AI. We have some companies that are going to be focusing on employee benefits and in communications and things like that, that we kind of saw trail off a little bit in, call it, 24 and 25. So it's nice to see those return because it gives us more variety when it comes to this cohort.
Next, Jackovin shares the latest developments for BTV Mania and what innovations to expect.
We bring all of our partners together with the startups that get into the cohort, and it's 2 3 days of high concentration of meetings and networking opportunities and social events, all of the things that are required to start building those relationships. Because what we're looking for, with our accelerator, which is very different than a lot of accelerators, is we're looking for products and solutions and tools that our partners can actually leverage inside their organization. So for us, it's not, is this like an investing tool? So if you look at the traditional like Y Combinator and Techstars, that is the accelerator is their investment tool, where we do invest in the companies that participate, but it's more so that we are kind of working together, so that we've invested in these companies, we want them to succeed, and we're looking to leverage them because if we can use the tools to identify risk sooner, drive down cost, be better for our end customers, then there's a real value there, and that's really what we're focused on. So we're doing that again this year. Obviously, every year we tweak it a little bit, but we are adding something that we kind of beta tested last year, which was called pre-TV Mania because it comes before BTV Mania. And what it was an effort to continually engage with our alumni. And so startups change, not just once a year, but they change, every week or every month. So having our alumni come back and meet with our partners as well is really, really important because A, we're adding new partners, and B, their technology and their companies are changing at such a rapid pace, gives us an opportunity to revisit those startups and those conversations and engage where it makes sense. So it's a great event. It's very, very well planned out. I wish I could take credit for that, but I don't. We definitely have a team of people who do who have their finger on the pulse of everything that's happening. And so that in combination with the great partners that we have and startups, it creates just a wonderful event.
We then dive into what opportunities AI can bring to operational change for brokerages and what changing priorities come with new tech and operational needs.
We're seeing brokers, and I think this kind of falls in line a little bit with the way AI has been rolling out, is that a lot of tools are really focused on specifically AI. How do you improve the current process, right? So you take the process and you go, okay, what do you do today? How do you make it more efficient? And that's kind of like the V1 of AI within brokers. And we're starting to see, there's been a few companies that have come out, the AI first digital broker. Um, and I think that is going to change that V1 into the V2 or the VN, wherever it ultimately ends up, in that those brokers that are AI first have a distinct advantage and opportunity because they can design their infrastructure, the way that they're set up, um, based off of how it works best for AI and how it works best in that world where AI is handling certain tasks. Whereas existing brokers have existing infrastructure and they have existing structure and the way that people, what they do and how they do it. And so, one of the things that I think is going to happen for the brokers who really embrace AI, is that they're going to start looking at not just how do you improve, we already do A to B, how do you improve that? It's more, does A to B even make sense anymore? Or does it completely, does that job or that role or that process make absolutely no sense if we were to start from scratch? And I think those AI first brokers are going to push the traditional broker into thinking that way, um, because the benefit that brokers had, especially when you start looking, 10, 15 years ago when InsurTech kind of really became its own thing, is that brokers knew the customer. Brokers, could talk to them, knew their business, knew their history, knew everything about them. and then new, obviously new insurance, right? And so you take these two things that existed. Well, when hippos and lemonades and the world came out, and everybody said, oh, it's going to disintermediate the broker. Well, no, because they don't know the customer. But what AI is now affording really anybody to do is to continually understand and iterate on that understanding of the customer. And so now, if you have AI that truly understands the customer and as they change, knows instantly that they've changed and something has changed about their business and can learn about their business, also knows insurance, now all of a sudden you do have something that could be disruptable, where it's not like continuous underwriting. I think that was a hot topic a couple of years ago, is like to be able to continually underwrite a policy as risk changes. Now it's just continually understanding your customer at a level that you know not to downplay, the once a year lunch that the broker might have with a particular customer. But ultimately that's the case, is like you can't wait a year to learn all of the things that have happened to that customer over that year. You need to be learning about it in real time and being able to make suggestions on where there might be coverage differences and things that be like, hey, well, if we waited, 6 months, then you would, if something happened, you would be underinsured or overinsured in certain cases. And so, AI is kind of democratizing some of the things that have been a bit proprietary, and so we're definitely seeing a change. How fast we get to that, I think, will depend on how fast these digital brokers or AI native brokers really can penetrate the market.
Later on, we delved into the carrier perspective and how their needs are changing.
One of the biggest benefits that carriers get from being a part of BTV is just seeing the solutions and the problems that the brokers have. And that is a huge one, and I don't think will change. Definitely not one of the things that I really thought of when BTV started, is that everybody works in their own silo, right? We all kind of work, and we hear information and it penetrates that silo, but you very rarely get an inside look as to, hey, this is what we're trying to solve. This is why we're trying to solve it. And ultimately, the carriers are looking for that inside understanding, to really what's happening on the other side of the supply chain. And so, carriers from that perspective, not necessarily changing, but we're always looking at ways to how can we drive that engagement between the brokers and the carriers to start solving problems a bit more holistically, as opposed to everybody working in their own silo. And then once it works here, we really don't care about what happens outside of it. And so the needs aren't necessarily what I would consider changing, but what we're doing is maybe changing how we look at collaboration between the brokers and the carriers, and then ultimately the end customer, and how can BTV help facilitate that. And some of the startups that we have, do work at carrier levels, at broker levels, and some are more customer broker. But we're always looking for solutions that help, the entire supply chain, as opposed to just, specifically to brokers.
Jackovin then shares how this cohort of BTV is prepared to pivot and address shifting needs and priorities.
So the 2026 cohort is interesting in the fact that we have a bit of a split between like horizontal versus vertical integration. So like of the startups, like I think it's around five or six of them are more multi line of business platforms. it, couple of them, or actually three or four of them, are more vertical specialists. So employee benefits, commercial properties, employee benefit sales, and commercial like workers' comp forms. One is an entirely new kind of line of business in that it focuses on AI governance. So we've had a lot of companies that have been AI focused, but this one is just maybe a level higher where it starts focusing on the governance around AI and how it's used within organizations. And so for us, that's really, really interesting because you, sometimes you would think that the governance should come before the utilization, but in most in most situations, it's the opposite. You start using it, and then you realize at some point that there needs to be this governance that surrounds it. And so, having that as a part of the cohort will be really, really interesting because it does say, all right, now that we have this, we should probably have some rules around this, which is yeah, obviously an important thing, as AI becomes more pervasive in our carriers and our brokers.
Lastly, Jackovin shares what's on the horizon for BTV.
So yeah, once we get through BTV Mania in early April, we're going to start. I shouldn't say start. We'll continue to plan for BrokerTech Connect, which will be in Chicago again. So last year we did our first kind of trial of BrokerTech Connect, pretty bespoke and small, around 200 and call it 220 participants. This year we'll probably double that. So very much focused on BrokerTech Connect and making that even with double 220, so call it 440 or 450, maybe on up to 500. It's still a very bespoke, small, intimate event, and that's our goal because there are plenty great events that are huge and tens of thousands of people. We definitely didn't want that. We were really focused more on how do we make it smaller, more intimate, more valuable based off of the time that you had. And obviously, it's broker focused, which does make sense. But that'll come up in late August, early September, and then we have kind of our fall slate of events. We have been doing more outreach on our carriers, so bringing our brokers to our carriers to kind of like talk through BTV and how it helps, not just the brokers, but the carriers. So we'll continue to do those. And then, like I mentioned, the kind of that fall slate of events, including InsurTech Connect, and we've done a lot with the CIAB and other organizations as we try to continue to just add value to not only our partners but the entire insurance market.
That was my conversation with John Jackovin, Executive Director of the BrokerTech Ventures Accelerator. I hope you enjoyed it. For more podcasts by Leaders Edge, go to leadersedge.com or subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts.